Honorable Minister and Ambassadors, Your Excellencies and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this live online event, A Diverse World, Universal Human Rights. This virtual event is organized by the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, and this will launch Finland's campaign for the UN Human Rights Council for the term 2022-2024. And we are very happy to have you with us, joining us to discuss human rights and the key themes that are at the heart of Finland's candidacy. The rights of women and girls, new technologies and digitalization, climate change and education. My name is Jussi-Pekka Rantanen, and it's my great pleasure to be the moderator of this event. And first of all, let me remind you that this webinar will be recorded, and the video of the event will be made available on the Finnish Foreign Ministry's website and via the same link as you are attending the event now. So if you have colleagues and friends who are interested in the topic but may not be able to join and follow this live stream, please do let them know that they can watch this event at a later date as well. A few quick words about our agenda this afternoon. In a minute, we'll hear introductions by Prime Minister of Finland, Ms. Sanna Marin, as well as our Foreign Minister, Mr. Pekka Haavisto. They will give us a bit of background on why Finland is seeking a membership in the Council. Then we shall have a panel discussion led by Minister for Development Cooperation and Foreign Trade of Finland, Mr. Ville Skinnari. And on top of Mr. Skinnari, we are very pleased to have 5 international high-level experts on human rights joining us for this discussion or debate. They will share their expertise, their experience, insight and ideas with us, and maybe challenge us in the themes that are the ones that Finland strives to highlight as a part of its campaign for the Council. But we do know that we have a huge amount of expertise and experience in our online audience as well, in you following the event wherever you are around the globe. And we have already received a number of questions, great questions in advance. So thank you for those. We are really grateful for all those questions. And we can pick some of those for the discussion for our panelists to comment on. Now, we cannot tackle all the valuable and important questions in this event, but we will make sure that they will be replied. All questions will be replied either in the future events by us or by the Finnish mission in Geneva or in Twitter, Facebook or website, so stay tuned. And so all of your comments, they will be noted and discussed, if not today, then later. And I've been told that we already have hundreds of people following this event in different countries, on different continents. So it's wonderful that there are so many of you who are passionate and enthusiastic about human rights, just like we are. So once more, let me wish you all most warmly welcome to this event to discuss diversity, equality, and the human experience. Now, without any further ado, let's get started. And we'll begin with welcoming words by the permanent representative of Finland in Geneva. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Ambassador Kirsti Kauppi.
Thank you, and a very warm welcome to everybody from me as well. We here at the Permanent Mission of Finland in Geneva are thrilled that all of you could join this event today. We at the mission are always happy to engage in a dialogue about how to strengthen the protection and promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms across the world. Finland is a candidate to the United Nations Human Rights Council for the years 2022 to 24. We would like to bring our contribution to the joint efforts of the Council to move towards a world where every person is treated with dignity and without discrimination. Today at this event we are focusing on some themes that we feel deserve attention. I hope you enjoy this event and that you find the discussions both interesting and inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Ambassador Kirsti Kauppi for these opening words. And like Ms. Kauppi beautifully said, we are doing our best, and our common mission is to move towards a world where every individual, every person is treated with dignity and without discrimination. Now, highlighting this has always been one of Finland's main priorities and one of the key reasons for Finland's campaign for the Council, the campaign that we are launching today. And launching with us is Prime Minister of Finland. She has sent us her video greeting for this event. So now it's my pleasure to give the virtual floor to Prime Minister Ms. Sanna Marin.
This past year has reminded us all that while the world is diverse, the human experience is universal. We have all gone through a very difficult time of global pandemic. We have also witnessed individuals in many countries raising their voices and fighting for their universal human rights. As we look forward to prior times, we must work towards a world where human rights are a reality for all and where no one is left behind. During its more than 100 years of independence, Finland has developed from a poor agrarian country into a prosperous nation. The road has not always been easy. We have achieved this by ensuring that everyone is included and by placing human rights and equality at the forefront. Free and high-quality education has been fundamental to Finland's success. We need educated children and motivated teachers in order to be able to tackle global challenges such as climate change, disinformation, or global pandemics. In order to prosper, we need to include everyone, persons of all backgrounds, ages, and abilities in our joint efforts. In doing so, we must step up efforts to guarantee gender equality and the full enjoyment of all human rights by all women and girls. We must not turn inwards. Through our human rights-based foreign and development policies, Finland is committed to promoting human rights and equality and to fighting extreme poverty globally. The Human Rights Council plays a central role in making human rights a reality for all of us in all countries. For this reason, we have put forward our candidacy for the Council. To tackle any global human rights issue or challenge, we need to work together. As a UN member state and a candidate for the Human Rights Council, Finland is strongly committed to close partnership with all stakeholders. It is our common duty to make sure that in this day and the days to come, everyone can fully enjoy their universal human rights.
Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Pekka Haavisto, you have a long history in working to advance human rights. Now that Finland is a candidate for UN Human Rights Council for the term 2022-24, could you please elaborate a little bit why Finland is seeking a membership in the Council?
Well, first of all, human rights, of course, belong to the key principles of UN work and UN cooperation. These are universal values that we are speaking about, and every country should be involved. And of course, UN Human Rights Council is the most important fora to discuss and support the human rights development. And currently, of course, if you look the Secretary General Guterres' role, Commissioner Bachelet and so forth, I think human rights have a very key position in the UN world today. And of course, human rights are in a key position in the current Finnish government program. Our foreign policy is based on human rights.
Since you said the key word universal, the Universal Declaration for Human Rights was adopted in 1948. Since then, the world has changed quite a bit. It has become more complex, more diverse. Why is the universality of human rights still important in today's world?
Universality is of course very important, and if you look the history, the end of the colonial period and so forth, where the human rights were had a very important role. In today's world, of course, we are living in the middle of new type of challenges. I'm thinking of the digital world and the social media and all this, which gives us a lot of possibilities, but also can be used in repression or marginalization or hate speech and so forth. So actually, this type of human rights individuals are meeting every day in the world.
Like you mentioned earlier, Finland's foreign and security policy, as well as development policy, they are all based on human rights. What will Finland emphasize as the main themes of its campaign for the Human Rights Council?
Of course, for us in development cooperation, the role of women and girls has always been important. And of course, this is also our scope in our work on human rights. And particularly during the pandemic, during the COVID-19 we can see that women, girls are more at home, probably not at school at all, and will maybe never return back to school if you speak about the girls. And this is something that we really very like to underline. And of course, it's including the reproductive health issues and so forth for women and girls.
And talking about women and girls, also education is one of Finland's fortes, one could say.
Education is of course key. Education is something that we see in our own society, how education in 100 years have been changing the Finnish society, and also that anyone can be in any profession, so to say, in the world. And for example, when we think about Africa today and the rapid population growth and the role of the young people, when that continent will be developed, education is needed, and Finland, of course, through the development cooperation, is supporting that very much.
You also mentioned digitalization. How do you see that and the role of digitalization as one of the main themes for Finland?
I think digitalization and human rights connected to digitalization is a very important topic for us, and of course it's even sometimes very difficult to follow all those new technologies, but unfortunately there are also some negative issues, like surveillance technologies are developing, and this can be very repressive also for people fighting for the human rights.
Maybe the fourth main theme for Finland is a burning topic that I know is close to your heart as well. It's climate change. How do you see the impact of climate change on human rights?
Well, climate, of course, is a key issue, and I worked myself many years in Sudan, in Darfur, and look into the very origin of the conflict. And you can say that actually, unfortunately, the environmental changes and the climate change and the desertification was one of the key factors that triggered a major human rights violations and situation where human rights should be defended. And I can see very strong connection between environment, climate and human rights.
And in order to combine some of these main themes, Finland has highlighted the role of human rights defenders, especially women, climate and indigenous defenders. What would you say, how can we enforce or make stronger the voice of these human rights defenders?
Well, when Finland had the presidency of European Union, we invited some of the human rights defenders to meet with the ministers. And actually many of my ministerial colleagues said that this was one of the best meetings that they have had because, you know, from eye to eye, and it happened so that all of them were female from different countries, different regions, and so forth. But I think it's very important that we give them voice to them and we also protect them. And one of the issues I'm particularly concerned is that every year we have more and more violations also for defenders of the environmental rights. So that's one important part of the human rights.
Now, we are about to have a panel discussion on human rights with some high-level experts. What would be your key message to our panelists?
Well, I'm very interested to hear actually what new is coming on the human rights field, and I think this digitalization and new technologies are putting us in front of the totally new type of challenges. But at the same time, don't forget the minorities, don't forget to give people their own voice, don't forget to fight for the rights of the human rights defenders.
Mr. Pekka Haavisto, thank you very much for laying a great foundation for the upcoming discussion. Thank you for sharing your ideas and your views. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, Mr. Haavisto is not able to join us live today, but the good news is that we have Minister for Development Cooperation and Foreign Trade of Finland with us, who's hosting the upcoming panel discussion. So it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Ville Skinnari. A big day for Finland.
Absolutely. I'm very happy to join you after the Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs.
How would you describe the importance of this event and Finland's campaign for the Council?
This is a big thing for us. It's a big thing for the whole government, and it's a priority for the whole government to have the candidacy and, of course, to have a very successful campaign and a result. So we are all very committed for this.
Great. And we just heard what Mr. Pekka Haavisto was expecting from the panel, but what would you say?
Well, I'm very excited to hear your views and thoughts and questions, of course, because for Finland it's always important that we have a true dialogue and we really also do everything to emphasize that we really go to the really grassroots level at the local side. So I'm very excited to hear your views and thoughts, and as always, Finland is ready to provide the answers.
Thank you, Mr. Skinnari. And you will join the discussion, you will share your views and Finland's priorities during the panel. And in the panel, we will discuss the main themes of Finland's campaign for the UN Human Rights Council. And those main themes are the rights of women and girls, new technologies and digitalization, climate change and education. Big themes, but fortunately we have extremely distinguished and renowned experts joining us as our panelists. So first of all, let me welcome Ms. Elizabeth Broderick from Sydney, Australia. She's a Chair Rapporteur of the United Nations Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. Ms. Broderick is also, among other things, a board member of the International Service for Human Rights. And previously, she has been Australia's longest-serving sex discrimination commissioner, promoting gender equality and breaking down social barriers. So welcome, Elizabeth. Joining us from Mexico City, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Magdalena Sepulveda. She's the Executive Director of the Global Initiative for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights and a former UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. Magdalena is also a member of the Independent Commission for the Reform of International Corporate Taxation, just to name a few of her positions. Our third panelist is a human rights advocate and defender, Ms. Mona Sabella. She currently coordinates global efforts to stop corporate capture and to ensure corporate accountability at ESCR.net. Recently, she also became a board member of the International Service for Human Rights. Ms. Sabella has formerly worked on defending human rights in, for example, Palestine, Libya, and Yemen. So good to have you with us, Mona. And also a pleasure to welcome Mr. Bruno Stagno Ugarte. He is the Deputy Executive Director responsible for advocacy at Human Rights Watch. Mr. Stagno is a former Minister of Foreign Affairs and UN Ambassador of Costa Rica and former President of the Assembly of States Parties of the International Criminal Court. Good afternoon to Paris, Bruno. And last but not least, we welcome Mr. Clément Voulet, joining us from Geneva. Mr. Voulet is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association, a human rights defender with over 30 years of experience promoting human rights in Africa and across the world. He's also an expert member of the working group on extractive industries, environment and human rights violations of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So what a great team of high-level human rights experts we have here. We really appreciate you joining us for this event, and we look forward to listening to your comments. And now, like I mentioned earlier, we'll discuss the key themes of Finland's HRC campaign with our panelists, and we'll begin with women and girls' rights. So, Elizabeth, these rights are at the heart of your work on a daily basis. How do you see the current situation and the main challenges when we talk about the rights of women and girls?
It's wonderful to be part of this fascinating discussion and to just share some reflections with you. I'm joining you from Sydney, Australia, on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And as is customary here in Australia, I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of our country, the Indigenous Australians. So I acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and pay my respect to their elders. So since the inception of our working group back in 2010, we have documented the gains as well as the remaining gaps in terms of women's rights and gender equality. And we're delighted to see that Finland has this as a central part of their of the work that they'll be doing. Because the work of our working group has covered all women and girls, acknowledging that women are diverse in their experiences and circumstances. And I think the key message of our work is that women are not just another vulnerable group. They are half the world's population. So it's right that we should focus on them. And yes, there has been significant progress. We've seen political participation of women doubling, and Finland has been a standout in this regard. We've seen technology enabling new forms of political expression and engagement. We've seen the closing of the gender gap in education, an increase in women's labour force participation, and most importantly, we've seen the right of women and girls to equality within the family guaranteed in most modern legal regimes. But unfortunately, more recently, our working group has documented a significant backlash against the rights of women and girls, and even against the use of the term gender itself. Gender equality is seen in many states today as the imposition of what people or groups are calling so-called gender ideology. They're seeing gender equality as the imposition of ideas and beliefs that destroy institutions such as the family, marriage and religious freedom. And one of the areas where we've seen the most pushback is in the area of family culture and sexual and reproductive rights. I mean, so many women today still live with the threat of criminal punishment for sexual or reproductive conduct, such as adultery, prostitution, sex work, or abortion. We see the lack of universal access to comprehensive sexuality education, the practice of child marriage and sexual violence leading to forced teenage pregnancy. And not only that, but the exclusion of girls, which your Prime Minister talked about, the exclusion of girls from education and employment. And what we've learned in our working group is that progress isn't linear. New political openings can bring about opportunities, but they can also bring about more backlash. And I just wanted to give one example of that, and that's recently in Latin America, where one country made an historic leap forward in legalising abortion, whilst another country in exactly the same region as a reaction to this progress, actually adopted a constitutional amendment prohibiting abortion under any circumstance. So women's human rights defenders are really critical in combating that backlash. And one of the most important things is to make sure they have a supportive environment in which to carry out their work. So in conclusion, I've been asked to challenge Finland, the country hosting this panel. I've been asked to put forward a challenge. So here's my challenge. The working group challenges Finland to become the champion of women's human rights as central to the global COVID recovery. The COVID pandemic is exacerbating inequality and economic security for women and girls, particularly the most vulnerable. We're seeing government responses as inadequate. And as we build back better in the next phase, in the phase of recovery with COVID, we have the opportunity to redress the structural inequalities that have consistently held women back. We have the opportunity to reimagine a different world. So I challenge Finland to walk the talk in reimagining that different world. And not only that, but to reach out to others to walk with you. The working group stands ready to assist with useful recommendations on laws, policies and approaches to achieve with urgency our shared goal of gender equality. Thank you.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. And I guess I can say challenge accepted to walk the walk. Now, our other panelists can chime in as well. But talking about human rights defenders, Mona, how do you feel about the points that Elizabeth just raised?
Thanks very much. Elizabeth covered this area brilliantly. I don't have too much to add, but perhaps only to re-emphasize that states, including Finland, do need to do more to combat violence against women and girls, not only by allocating more resources to advance protections, but also by strengthening legislation that would deter all acts of violence against women and girls. Another key point to raise is that we have to work ensuring that both the Human Rights Council, but also nationally, the demands of grassroots women leaders and human rights defenders, as well as feminist visions, are at the center of legal and policy development. And I was glad to hear the foreign minister's remark on human rights defenders in support of this. And finally, in the context of the pandemic, I reflect on member discussions within ESR Network who, reflecting what Elizabeth mentioned, focused on how the current crisis has accentuated the structural inequalities in our dominant economic system, including gender inequalities. The COVID-19 pandemic has been disproportionately affecting women in various channels, and it's no surprise given that many women, certainly a higher percentage than men, work in providing care in both formal and informal economies. So I think to address this, Finland and other states as well can prioritize the thinking of many feminist movements who have already identified economic alternatives for a just recovery from the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. Let's give our minister a chance to respond here at this point. They are clearly challenging us to be champions and to combat violence against women. Important issues. How would you respond to Mona and Elizabeth?
I fully agree with you. We have to do more. We have to be able to do far more because gender equality benefits the whole society. I think the history of Finland is a good example. It's not been easy, as the Prime Minister said. And we still have challenges in Finland as well. But I think one of the key factors is that women and girls have equal opportunity to join education, working life in a similar way as men and boys. And at the end of the day, it has a huge impact also on the economy itself. And we see from the statistics that if at the global level, women and girls had the same opportunity as men and boys, the world economy could be even 25% higher than GDP. So we're talking about a system level change, and I fully agree that Finland can really pave the way and show with an examples also when it comes to legislation. But let's be honest, to be frank, Finland has still problems with the violence against women. We all have to face that fact. And also we have to look at the structures, as you just said. But for Finland, as always, the multilateral cooperation is very important. We are very large supporters of UN Women, for instance. And I think we need more this kind of local partnerships as well, but also take the legislation on board. But definitely gender equality, including people with disability, is the very key priority for Finland. And now I think it's time for new kind of partnerships, and Finland is ready to carry that responsibility and get things further.
So I guess the key word here is together. We need to work for the better future together. Now, another highly important theme for Finland and for the rest of the world is obviously new technologies and digitalization. Finland is known for its high-tech companies and innovative digital solutions and willingness to embrace possibilities that the new technologies can offer in pretty much every walk of life. But now that we talk about human rights, Mr. Clément Boulet, could you tell us a bit about how you see the relationship, the connection between human rights and new technologies and digitalization? Clément.
Thank you very much, moderator, Your Excellencies. Thanks for inviting me to this important meeting to discuss the protection and promotion of human rights in the diverse world. As you know, I serve as a UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of peaceful assembly and association, and as a rapporteur, my task is to promote these rights, is also to be the spokesperson of the promotion and protection of these fundamental rights. I just wanted to go quickly on the question that you asked me. You know, since I took my mandate in 2018, I pay attention on one important issue, which is the relation and also how the new technology impact the enjoyment of this fundamental freedom, meaning the right to freedom of association and peaceful assembly. And I want also to mention before maybe going to that this right is really important as it helps society, communities to be able also to shape their own future. Through the enjoyment of this fundamental freedom, community are able also to come together, to organize together. Defenders are able to organize community to come together in order to tackle some of the challenges that we are facing in this world, including climate change, including COVID-19, including also the poverty, inequality, and also to ensure also that those who are left in the margin of development are able also to enjoy their fundamental freedom, which is also the freedom of association, peaceful assembly, but also they are able also to be included in the agenda of development. So since I took this mandate, I was more focused to understand how the new technology, which is important, let's say that, which are really important for the development. They are really important because they empower civil society today to be able to do their work, to be able also to ensure that those technologies serve the purpose of human being. And we saw also that thanks to this new technology, civil society was able to expand their work. Civil society was able also to use those new technology to promote and to change the way that the promotion and protection of human rights. We saw also that this new technology helped today, in most part, most of the democratic revolution, most of the gathering that lead to the democracy, that need new technology, help people to communicate. It also help people also to be able also to come together, to mobilize, but to be able also to address some of the core issues of their country. Let's take example today of COVID-19. Can we imagine if we don't have all of these social measures, if we don't have this new technology that emerged today, if we don't have them, can you imagine how we will be able to navigate through this COVID-19, how we will be able to continue to keep in contact with victims, to be able also to keep in contact with each other. So those new technology are important, and they really help society, they really help human rights defenders to be able also to continue to continue. But unfortunately, let me also put it there that this new technology sadly also have a lot of impact on the enjoyment of human rights. We know that since this new technology appear, many states use those technology to restrict civil society space, including through the surveillance, online surveillance, acquiring new technology or new tools to survey opposition, to survey civil society online. We also know that this new technology also is used sometimes also to restrict or to propagate hate speech online. We also know that this new technology, through what we call today artificial intelligence today, are really restricting our space. They are already undermine our privacy. We don't even know today. If I give the example of facial recognition, we know that facial recognition today is it's have chilling effects. While people accept when people come to the streets to protest, they come to the streets to gather together. They come to the street because they feel like they are part of the community, they are part of a big gathering. But we know that because of this facial recognition today, people in many countries now are where those technology, where facial recognition is in public space, like cameras and everything, people are no longer, don't have incentive to come to the streets to protest because they are afraid, because this technology are collecting their data without their permission, without their consent. So the artificial intelligence today is also one of the really important issue that I think Finland need to be focused on. Also, how can we address, while we recognize that new technology are important for human rights, how do we ensure that some of these technology, artificial intelligence, do not undermine what we see as a value of using this new technology? But also the important part also is state surveillance online. We know that many states, in many countries today, they are surveilling opposition party. They are buying equipment from developing countries. When we talk about some of the repressive countries, they are buying equipment from developing countries to survey their opposition, to survey human rights defenders. How do we ensure that companies are held responsible for not transferring those technology to the country that will use this technology to survey? And I think Finland can play a leadership, protecting human rights defenders today, committing to protect civil society, committing to protect women activists, is also committing also to protect them from any kind of harassment, for any kind of new technology that will hamper their work, that also will prevent them to be able to exercise their right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. And
Clement, thank you. Clement, thank you very, very much. Very important points, and let me just, I don't want to cut you short, I'm sorry, but just in order to keep the schedule and let Minister just respond to you. You raised many very important points, and talking about kind of summing up that technology can be a double-edged sword, which it definitely is. And we also got a question relating to what you said from our online audience, because I promised to pick up a couple of questions there. So our online audience asks also that apart from high policies on international fora, which are the tangible actions that government has planned or invested to enhance possibilities for Finnish SMEs to participate in the campaign themes on the ground, bearing in mind what Clement just said? Mr. Skinnari.
Well, I think the most important thing is that we all understand that new technologies, they can really benefit everybody, all people. And of course, we can also, by having the right kind of adaptation, we can strengthen democracy and we can strengthen the communication. But as you pointed out well, there's the other side of the coin. We really have to pay attention that there is trust between the people, between the networks, between the operators. And therefore, of course, Finland wants to emphasize that nobody should be left behind. But I think to your question, for us, of course, in Finland, it's so important that we include the NGOs, we include people when we are planning and doing and implementing digital strategies, when we are taking these and when we're working on the penetration. It is the quality question as well, price question. We have to be able to understand that we need the social dimension there. So in other words, it has to be a true partnership. And in a country like Finland, digital solutions, they really work in this way, and we've been able to raise the productivity at the same time. So all in all, we need everybody, and once again, we need the public-private partnerships, and we need, of course, the system level approach to have the legislation, the trustworthiness in place that we can really deliver.
And Clement, I'm really sorry for cutting you short because you were so passionate. Do you want to finish your sentence? Just give you a chance for that.
No, I think the minister just replied, but what I just want also to put forward is also to say also that we need also to understand that this technology, the digital technology and the artificial intelligence, it's just begun. That we need, when we think about norms, when we think about ensuring that we have standards that are put in place, we need also to ensure that those standards help us to ensure that this technology, they can respect human rights today, but also those who will be invited for the future. Because those technologies are really involving that today. We need to think more about how do we prevent them today to undermine the human rights? How do we ensure that, well, this technology provides us for very good things to do? How do we ensure that they are not becoming what I would call the technology that undermine completely our democracy? And because if we don't, today we see the increase of civic space online, for example. And those civic and space online, if you see all the digital, you see this is where people are today building democracy and everything. If we don't keep this safe, then we are compromising the future for our democracy. And
Very
I think
well
that
said,
Finland
Clement.
can play a good role on that. Thank you very much.
Very well said, Clement. And since we talk about technology, Finland is also known for its smart and clean technology and pure nature. And maybe that's why one of the reasons why Finland wants to highlight also climate change in its campaign for the council. Now, Magdalena, earlier you mentioned that you would definitely like to say a few words about this topic. What makes climate change especially important to you from a human rights point of view, Magdalena?
Thank you very much. I think that it's very important to highlight that even before we started with COVID, the world was facing a perfect storm. We were having historic levels of inequality, wealth and income inequality. The political space was shrinking, the democratic space was shrinking, and we were in a climate crisis. Of course, this situation exacerbated after March 2020, when COVID rapidly spread around the world. And now what we're facing is an increase of inequality. We're not only facing the fact that gender gap is increasing, but it's more worrisome than that, because we are also in a position in which it's quite likely that all the ones that women movement have made, all the great achievement that they have made in the last decades in terms of gender equality, they're threats to go back and reversing those gains and be in a worse situation. And of course, there is the climate crisis that continue. And it's important to note that these two things are interlinked. Inequality is both a driver of climate change, and it's also exacerbated by climate change. And both has enormous impact for the enjoyment of human rights, economic, social, cultural, but also civil and political rights. But I think that we have to see the COVID-19 pandemic also as an opportunity. This unprecedented challenge that we are confronted also allowed us to think that it is possible to take measures that before we haven't thought about it. It is the right time in which citizens, the common people, are very aware of the pandemic. And it is very interesting to note that while after the economic crisis of 2008, 2009, the world wasn't prepared to take very strong measures about climate change, now it is different. Now, around the world, citizens are more aware that this pandemic is also linked to climate change, and therefore it is essential, it's a matter of survival that we take measures and move forward. But as we transition toward a low carbon world, with climate response measures also have the potential to harm human rights, particularly from local communities, from indigenous people whose land and territories are in close proximity to climate mitigation projects. And we heard this morning about the threat to human rights and environmental defenders in particular. Therefore, it is critical that we ensure that as we respond, as we move to a just transition, we ensure that the rights of people are respected, all type of rights, and in particular that gender voices and the voices of all those who are discriminated against or are in a vulnerable or disadvantaged position are also heard in the measures, in deciding the measures to address climate change. So following the pattern of this morning, I'm not going to challenge Finland. I think that Finland has been the forefront of doing this work, but I just want to ask Finland to continue to keep the work on climate change and human rights together and keep being the champion on moving towards a just transition that respects the rights of everyone and in particular of women. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Magdalena. And by the way, challenges are very, very welcome. So we welcome those with open arms. But Bruno has been waiting a long time. Sorry, Bruno. So we've got lots of questions regarding climate change, and let me throw one at you. Many of them say that we need to strengthen the human rights framework to tackle climate change. So what do you think? What should be the first steps in this area? Bruno, what would you say?
Yes, well, thank you for the invitation, and let me maybe start with a larger conception about the Human Rights Council's role in early warning, and I'd like to make some summary points. So my first one is that human rights and early warning are inextricably interrelated. They're interlinked, they're mutually reinforcing. We all know that human rights and fundamental freedoms provide important valves to diffuse potential or actual tensions, and as the foreign minister has spoken, obviously, the links between climate change and human rights violations are there for all of us to see in Darfur and elsewhere. But human rights violations are also an early warning sign of potential conflict, and their timely redress can contribute to conflict prevention or de-escalation. And this brings me to my second point, and this is the importance of human rights monitoring and reporting for effective early warning. Now, the difference between an international human right from a mere domestic entitlement is acceptance that compliance with the right is a legitimate subject of international concern. So this necessarily requires, at minimum, monitoring and reporting and genuine cooperation from the states concerned. Now, we are unfortunately aware that this remains a wider concern as many governments fail to cooperate with treaty body mechanisms, with special procedures, and other reporting or monitoring tools, either by denying them access, rejecting their conclusions, refusing their recommendations. Yet human rights monitoring and reporting, be it in conflict or non-conflict situations, for example, in a climate change situation, is essential to defending and guaranteeing fundamental freedoms before it is too late, to establishing the facts when violations have occurred, to identifying and ensuring accountability for perpetrators, and to avoiding a climate of impunity, which can trigger further instability and conflict. And in that sense, what has been happening in the Amazon is particularly interesting, because here we have climate change and we have deforestation, and yet what the government of Bolsonaro has been doing is basically abetting a number of criminal networks that are furthering the deforestation of the Amazon, who are committing crimes against environmental and indigenous defenders, and basically trying to do this while trying to ride freely on a potential free trade agreement with the European Union. So this is where that monitoring and reporting becomes extremely important. And I think the case of Brazil is one that should call everyone's attention. My third point here would be that early warning is more than just technical assistance and capacity building. That human rights abuses are committed by governments or else by non-state actors, where governments have lost or outsourced their monopoly on the legitimate use of violence. That early warning therefore requires a commitment to use political capital in calling out the perpetrators. And here, following up on what the other panelists have said, I would add, it's not enough just to call them out in generic and non-specific terms, but what we need are very precise and active indications of who these perpetrators are. Early warning is therefore not only about contributing through dialogue and cooperation to the prevention of human rights abuses, but also about singling out the perpetrators and exerting the necessary leverage and pressure so that they can change their abusive policies and practices and to prevent or avert a human rights emergency. Now, the Human Rights Council has several tools and mechanisms for early warning, including intercessional briefings, special sessions, prevention urgency reports by the High Commissioner, joint statements, reports by special procedures, the recent Sri Lanka report by the High Commissioner and joint statements by special procedures on each of Sri Lanka and China, as well as the special session on Myanmar, are all good examples of tools in action. The Council's recent prevention resolution strengthens the toolkit through enhanced provision for briefings and Council action when there is a heightened risk of a human rights emergency. All of this is incredibly useful, and therefore it would be a missed opportunity not to apply such responses to emerging crises, such as, for example, the one that we're seeing now in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Now, the issue, however, at least as I see it, is not one for a lack of tools, even if some of them can be improved and strengthened, but more of political will. And in this sense, this is the challenge to Finland, but to all potential Human Rights Council members. And this is that they need to subscribe and abide by the incoming members' pledge and to the objective criteria in determining whether and how the Human Rights Council should act on countries of concern, as these are very important steps to enhance early warning. So leadership is key, and the least we would expect of any state aspiring to Council membership is a willingness to lead on country-specific situations when objective criteria are met. Now, my last and fourth point is that the Human Rights Council as an organ and the Office of the High Commissioner as an office are, of course, not islands of early warning. Both should seek to benefit from other monitoring and reporting tools that are natural components to its own mechanisms. But they should also be more strategic in how they feed their human rights concerns into other UN bodies and offices with early warning mandates. Both need to overcome the transatlantic divide they have with the Security Council on the one hand and the Secretary General on the other. The Security Council members need to be more proactive and determined in issuing invitations to the High Commissioner, to special rapporteurs, to Human Rights Council mandated fact-finding missions or commissions of inquiry, to brief the Security Council on emerging or over-the-horizon situations. And let's not forget that invitations to brief the Security Council are procedural decisions. They only require 9 affirmative votes and cannot be vetoed. And on the Secretary General, there should be a concerted push on the Secretary General to use his Article 99 prerogatives. He needs to tell the Security Council what it needs to know, not what it wants to hear. That was one of the lessons of Srebrenica, Rwanda, and Sri Lanka. They also need to remind the Secretary General that unfortunately his call to action, launched in February of last year, has seen very little action and is no substitute for the promise of human rights up front. And my last point would be about the unlearning of lessons past and present. Many of the lessons of Srebrenica in Rwanda, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar are all documented in after-the-fact mea culpa reports that have been largely unlearned. The Human Rights Upfront initiative, which was a direct result of the Petrie report on Sri Lanka, and we know that we need to consider Sri Lanka again at the Human Rights Council, is a forgotten relic that the Secretary General rarely references. And this collective unlearning is certainly not helpful.
Bruno, thank you so much for very important points. Now, let me give a quick word to our minister here at the studio. Bruno very clearly highlighted and underlined the importance of early actions and the need for political will. I would guess you would agree.
Well, I think Finland has really been proactive, and we have really paved the way also at the multilateral field, but also bilaterally when it comes to early warning systems. I think that is a good example what we're doing in practice, also at the country level. But you're exactly right. We cannot be reactive. We have to be proactive. And human rights, of course, it's in a very core with the climate change as well. But then we come, of course, to the question that how we build up the political dialogue. Yes, we have a lot of experience, even with the permanent members of Security Council. Yes, Finland has been very active throughout the history. But also that I think what you just described as an example that how you see the early warning concept, if you like, as a good layer. I think this is a good example that how many human rights themed difficulties we face and what kind of solutions are needed. But I would also emphasize that, of course, Agenda 2030, it's our priority. We really have to work hard in order to achieve the sustainable development goals. But we need the human rights in a very core, even with this, as we need with the digitalization, as we do with the gender equality questions. It all comes at the end to human rights.
The fourth key theme for Finland in its Human Rights Council campaign is education. So let's move on to that. And Mona, education clearly is a core human right. It's a fundamental human right. Your thoughts on the matter?
Thanks again, Mr. Rantanen. And let me also thank Finland for their invitation to be part of this discussion. As you know, Human Rights Council membership comes with great responsibilities and expectations. And as a candidate for membership, Finland has an opportunity to prioritize the rights of groups who are most at risk of human rights violations. We're all going through a lot at the moment, and imagine the added layers of hardship that groups like refugees or other oppressed and marginalized communities have had to endure during the COVID-19 pandemic. So state obligations to ensure equal rights for all, including the right to access inclusive, free, and quality education, whether it's in crisis or not, it starts with addressing the root causes of systemic injustices, both at the Council and at home. At a macro level, addressing disparities in access to education means that states around the world should be prioritizing human rights and people before profit. And one way to do this requires states like Finland to push back against the trend to privatize and commercialize education. Privatization is a symptom of corporate capture or corporate influence on government decision-making, and it puts a heavy price on education while changing its status from a public service to a business that is profitable for economic elites and accessible only by a select part of our society. As the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education explained in a 2019 report, states have an obligation to regulate private involvement in education. And currently at the Human Rights Council, there's a treaty process that's ongoing that seeks to regulate business activity. And it's significant for Finland and for other member states as well to engage in good faith particularly given the fact that many civil society organizations have been participating in this process. The Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education, whose mandate was renewed unanimously by the Council last June, also recommends the full implementation of the Abidjan principles that Magda might comment on for a bit after my presentation. The fifth of the overarching 10 principles requires states to prioritize the funding and provision of free, quality public education. In reality, wealthier states that typically hoard resources will often prioritize profit making and an economy of violence with inexcusable amounts of funding on military and arms, while funding for public service reforms in education and training or healthcare is constantly undermined and undervalued. Meanwhile, in countries affected by colonialism and imperialism, resources have for years been depleted and exploited. Today, many of these countries find themselves with a devastating lack of resources, and they're highly dependent on politicized aid. So instead of reparations, exploitative countries have often imposed debt, creating additional challenges to nations that aspire to be economically independent and self-sufficient. In taking action, Finland and states generally and international financial institutions have to work to implement meaningful debt cancellations to low-income and medium-income countries and enact long overdue reparations that one would hope will inevitably boost resources for education as well as other public services. I'd like to share a final thought on human rights advocacy at the UN in agreement with what Bruno mentioned. For many human rights defenders and activist groups, success of a member state at the Council is to a large extent embodied in their ability to publicly scrutinize states when committing human rights violations and in creating spaces to address particularly dire situations. So whether we're talking about the killing of human rights defenders in Colombia or imprisonment of defenders in Iran or Egypt or Bahrain or Saudi Arabia or war crimes in Palestine, Syria, and Yemen, or the crackdown on peaceful dissent in India or even systemic racism in the US, the Council is the place to name countries for committing human rights violations, including those that will have a particular impact on the right to education. That would be the Council's greatest strength and its source of credibility. Thank you very much.
Mona, thank you very much for raising really interesting and important points. Now, let me see if I can squeeze in one more question from our online audience, which has been sent to us, submitted to us in advance. Elizabeth, and it's great to see your video, Elizabeth. Good to have the connection on again. One of the many questions regarding education is, or reads as follows: in the context of COVID pandemics, how could we better make use of digitalization in the educational process? Now, Clément beautifully explained the importance of digitalization, but how would you link it to education and educational process? Just in a nutshell, Elizabeth.
Well, in a nutshell, I think that digitization is absolutely critical in education, but the issue in terms of gender equality is the digital divide. And particularly the fact that there are more digital devices in the hands of men and boys than in the hands of women and girls. So I think until we actually start to address some of the digital divide, we will still see women excluded from education and the ramifications of that, which I think Mona and indeed your Prime Minister spoke so very strongly to. The fact is, we need girls educated. If we want prosperous, if we want, socially cohesive nations, you can't go past educating girls. And one other thing I'd say is during the global pandemic, we're seeing so many young girls out of school. The Millennium Development Goals were good in actually closing the gender gap, particularly in girls' education. that the progress that we'd made there, we're starting to see that dissipate. And I think to the great, distress of so many of us who advocate so strongly for girls' education. But yeah, we need to really address the digital divide if we're to get the most out of digitisation and technology in schools. So I agree with Clement.
Thank you very much, and thanks for bringing us the full circle back to women and girls, the rights of women and girls. Now, we've addressed a number of highly important themes in our work for universal human rights, a diverse world. And to sum it all up, in conclusion, I want to ask our panelists one more quick final question, but just briefly, in a nutshell, on a soundbite level, what is the one most important thing that you would ask to remember from today's discussion? What would be the biggest takeaway, beginning with Magdalena? Please unmute yourself. You're still muted. Seems that we've got a slight technical issue. So let's take Mona first. What would be the biggest takeaway for our audience from this discussion? Mona.
Thanks again. I think I would just reiterate that, groups who are marginalized and communities, such as refugees who are facing a lot of hardship already in their day-to-day life, should really be at the center of decision-making on how to strengthen our human rights mechanisms. And it's because they are really at the center of these violations and are the most susceptible to them. So I think in Finland's work, and hopefully maybe as a member of the Council in the future, we hope to see Finland prioritizing these groups and their demands.
Mona, thank you very much. Now, Clement, in a nutshell, what is the one most important thing that we should remember from today? Please. Oh, Clement, hold on, we can't hear you. Hold on, Clement. Are you muted or do we have a technical issue?
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now perfectly. Please go on.
Okay, thank you very much. I was saying that I think one thing that we need also to remember today is that I think we all agree that our world is going through a very, very difficult challenge. We mentioned climate change, we mentioned inequality, we mentioned COVID-19, we mentioned also some of the repressive regime that are emerging on the ground, like Bruno just said. And I think one of the things that is that they are committed government to help to address those issues like Finland. But my understanding is also that in order to be able to contribute to address those issues, to challenge these issues, we need also to ensure that communities, defenders, civil society that is organized themselves on the ground to challenge climate change, to challenge inequality, are also safe to do their work. They can also enjoy their fundamental right to come together, to organize together, to be able to challenge that. We know also that digital technology expand our right today. But unless we are able to make it safe for women, we make it safe for communities, we make it safe for defenders, we will miss really the importance of this digital technology in our life. That's why we need government to take the leadership to ensure that companies are held responsible. States that use internet shutdown are held responsible. That also digital divide, that not only between men and women, but also between countries. Because we saw that during this COVID-19, some countries were not able to have connectivity. We need those countries also to ensure that though other countries have technology that they can access to this important tool, which is the internet, which is also new technology. And I think Finland commit themselves to protect defenders, they commit themselves to help civil society, women, and Finland will also commit himself also to tackle some of those challenges by supporting civil society that is fighting on ground to ensure that we build a diverse world, a future world where everybody enjoys his fundamental freedom. Thank you very much.
Clement, thank you. And let's try Magdalena again. It seems that we have solved the technical issue. Magdalena, let's try again. Your biggest takeaway, just on a soundbite level. Okay, Magdalena, sorry. I was too eager. It looks like we still have the problem, but hey, we are problem-solving professionals. So let's do this. Do you have a paper and pen there? Do you have paper and pen? Oh, hey, now I can hear you. Okay, you have paper and pen? Great. Write one word or max 2 words for us while Elizabeth and Bruno are giving their final say. And I'll go from there. Elizabeth, please.
Okay, I'm going to be very quick. I mean, I think that one of the takeaways, I agree with everyone in terms of what was said and their takeaways. But for me, I took away that we have to act collectively, member states, UN entities, international human rights bodies, and also civil society. We have to act collectively and we have to act with urgency because the current context is one which is undermining human rights. We thought it was difficult before the COVID pandemic. Now we know that the existing inequalities are being exposed in an incredible way, and it requires every one of us to step up strongly and take action. And I think Finland, being on the Human Rights Council, can actually take a strong leadership role in bringing us together.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Great work. And while Magdalena is writing, Bruno, your biggest takeaway in a nutshell.
So taking it where Elizabeth left us, I would say, yes, working collectively, but bringing the generic and the thematic appeals for human rights down to the ground, where they're actually happening, to the country-specific situations. We need to do a better job in pointing to the perpetrators and basically giving them no opportunity to remain with impunity.
Thank you, Bruno. And now, Magdalena, are you ready? Okay. Can you show us your word or 2 words? Man, I've got a bad eyesight. I gotta come closer. Gender equality, participation. Thanks, Finland. Okay, what a great way to end this. Thank you so much. Thanks to Bruno, to Mona, to Clement, Magdalena, and Elizabeth. Thanks for being so pliable. Thank you so much. Thanks for your expertise, your beautiful ideas, and all the wonderful answers you've given us. We really greatly appreciate it. And I also want to thank our online audience for joining us and for all the wonderful comments and questions that we have received. So unfortunately, we couldn't discuss all the great questions you had, but we will address them, for example, in our future events by our Finnish Commission in Geneva or on our social platforms, Twitter, Facebook, website. And the video of this event will be posted on the Finnish Foreign Ministry's website as soon as possible, because this was a great start for hopefully many more conversations to come. We plan to carry on conversations over the next months during Finland's campaign to the UN Human Rights Councils. So thank you very much, and especially big thank you to our wonderful panelists. And in conclusion, I would like to, of course, thank our Minister Ville Skinnari and give the floor to him for concluding remarks. Mr. Skinnari, please.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you all for your remarks and comments and conclusions. And for Finland, it's so important that we have this kind of a dialogue. Because as said earlier, this is what we need. We need the global community. We need the UN more than ever in this very difficult situation what the whole world has faced. And human rights, yes, it's in a very core of this, with the gender equality questions, with climate change, digitalization and education. And of course for Finland, education, it's in a very core. And I would say and send a strong message to you and everybody that we see that education is a human right. Everybody should have a right for education. And the situation is very alarming, and therefore we must act now. And as said, we have to be proactive. But most importantly, we have to build up the local dialogue. We have to have the political willingness, commitment, and also we have to encourage ourselves to find out the solutions. So once again, thank you so much. Let's keep in touch and see you in Geneva, see you elsewhere. And whatever happens, Finland is here for the human rights questions and answers, and I really look forward to working with you. Thank you so much.
Minister Skinnari, thank you very much. This event, A Diverse World, Universal Human Rights, has launched Finland's campaign for the UN Human Rights Council for the term 2022-2024. Thank you for joining us. And finally, in order to summarize the main elements of Finland's candidacy, here is Prime Minister of Finland, Ms. Sanna Marin.
If Finland is elected to the Human Rights Council, we are committed to share our experiences on building a society that is based on democracy, the rule of law, and the promotion, protection, and fulfillment of universal human rights. Climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic have worsened challenges faced by women and girls everywhere. Persons in the most vulnerable situation, including persons with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, and persons belonging to various minorities, are often disproportionately affected. Now more than ever, we need to work together to make their human rights a reality. Finland promotes human rights in close partnership with other states and regions, human rights defenders, national and international civil society organizations, as well as the private sector. As a leading nation in gender equality, education and digitalization, we will combine these strengths in our work at the Human Rights Council.